This hasn't happened yet, although when you listen to it, it might have happened already. The Supreme Court is hearing cases about affirmative action, challenges to Harvard's policies and North Carolina's policies. North Carolina State, correct?
University of North Carolina, I believe.
Oh, okay. So UNC, not NC State. All right.
University of
Anyway,
North
we're gonna
Carolina.
link a bunch of the arguments, so you'll hear the primary sources. They're hearing them right now, but it's clear to me that the Supreme Court is going to take a big chunk out of affirmative action very, very soon. And the reason why I know this for sure is because of the way Justice Roberts is talking. He's clearly eager to take a chunk out of affirmative action, and he's kind of the swing vote at this point. But he's a conservative. I mean, the conservatives have a 6-3 majority. Roberts sometimes acts as kind of a swing vote, but it's clear that he's no fan of affirmative action. The only question is how they write this ruling. Depending on how they write it, they could just limit it to North Carolina, Harvard, the question at hand, or they could write it broad enough that it affects all universities. They can even more so write it so broadly that it affects all affirmative action policies in the country. That's totally within the control of the Supreme Court. But it's clear that they're going to take a chunk out of it. They're going to rule in some way against affirmative action. You don't have to be a genius to know that that's coming down the pipe. And so we listen to a lot of these arguments. Now, basically, the case that is precipitating this, that is bringing the question to the court, are, I don't want to misspeak, but is it like people who are proponents of Asian Americans who have sued Harvard and North Carolina because of discriminatory policies? I'm not quite sure, but that is one of the topics that they've been talking about, whether that affects how it affects Asian Americans. Now, just for full disclosure, we're both Asian American. I I don't want to make this seem like a situation like of sour grapes because I mean, we pretty much went to the schools we wanted to go to. Did you not go to the school you wanted to go to? You did. Did you want
Not,
to go?
no, no, I didn't go to the school I wanted to go to.
Oh, where did you want to go?
I think I would have liked to go to Harvey Mudd.
Really?
Yeah.
But you didn't get in?
Nope.
Okay.
Yeah. My application was not that strong.
Oh. Well, mine wasn't either, so I'm not upset or anything. I had a high SAT score, but my GPA was shit.
Hmm.
But I think needless to say, if I were African American, I might have gotten in, but I'm not really upset. I didn't want to go out of state really anyway.
I'm not upset either, and
No.
I'm not blaming my
No.
failure on affirmative action.
And it's not like we went to bad schools or anything like that.
Right.
So it's not an issue of sour grapes, but we do have a very strong point of view that Asian Americans have been discriminated against. We are of that position, and I think if you look at the evidence, it's super clear that they have been. Harvard has this thing called a personality score. What do they call it? They call it, let's just call it a
Personal score.
personality score,
They
personal
call it
score,
personal score. Yeah.
personal score. But basically it's personality, right? Because when they describe what it means, they talk about introverted, et cetera, et
Oh,
cetera.
yeah, I got it here. It's integrity, courage, kindness, and empathy.
Right. And they have to release these scores, and for whatever reason, Asians score super low on it. Now, maybe Asians are just really bad at these metrics, sure, even though they're all subjective. But I'm sure that if you had a totally subjective score and you just happened to give all your black candidates super low scores in it, you would have to explain yourself now, wouldn't you? Yeah, you would.
Yeah. You know, I'm, it's not clear how they come up with this personal score exactly. I think I heard that it's essentially given by the person that screens the application.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
And
They've described that. Yeah. If you
that
listen to the
means,
testimony.
I mean, are they watching, like, are the interviews taped? Are they
Who
watching an interview,
knows?
or is it purely from, written? Because if you're trying to gauge these traits from a written application, that's pretty arbitrary, I would say.
Yes, I would say it's subjective and it's arbitrary, and the Supreme Court justices dig into that pretty comprehensively. So our view is basically that yes, Asian Americans are discriminated against when it comes to getting into Harvard, when it comes to getting into some of these schools. The numbers don't lie. You have to score so much higher than other races, including white, to get into these top schools. Why? It's not anti-racism, right? If it was about just anti-racism, theoretically, Asians have experienced racism, so why are they being punished by the system? Well, we all know the real answer. The real answer is that Asians are punished because quotas need to be met. They need more black and brown people in these schools. Asians score too well, and so they're going to lose out. But then it's not about merit. Okay, it's not about merit. They admit that it's not about merit, so that's not like a gotcha or anything. But they also say it's not hurtful to Asians or anything like that. And they use arguments such as, and I want to point out some of the arguments that the lawyers used. They say that diversity is its own good, and they cite things like military effectiveness is higher when you have a diverse army, or stock traders trade better when they're diverse. I don't know about that, but I would counter that. Where do they get this idea that military effectiveness is better with diversity?
Yeah, that sounds insane.
Haven't all
It's
the
like,
most effective armies been homogenous, such as the Israeli army, such as the North Vietnamese army that we lost to? I think we had a pretty diverse army when we fought the North Vietnamese, and they had way fewer resources, and somehow we lost to them. How did that happen? I don't know. It didn't seem like diversity helped us too much in that situation. These seemed like numbers drawn out of nowhere. I don't think that our military is necessarily more effective because it's diverse, right?
that argument
And
is insane.
no,
It
and
is.
you had a lot of arguments about basically here's how I would characterize the Supreme Court justices. And the first thing I would want to say is when you listen to, and it's been a while since I've listened to Supreme Court justices, that the whole court has changed. Much of the court has changed since I've listened to arguments. But what's interesting to me is that it's really obvious which people on the court are good at arguing, are good at debating, and which ones are not.
Hmm.
I'm not trying to be biased here, but none of the liberals are very good at debating. Even if I were a liberal, I swear to you, I would not find them good at debating. People who are good, Alito, Gorsuch, are super good at debating their points. And what's funny is they just kind of bring in the same like common sense analogies and arguments that, I would like to think that you or I would. They don't lean on legalese or anything like that. They just bring really common sense arguments that people can understand. And they use
I think that's
plain language to make their
yeah,
points.
yeah. That was very evident in listening to these arguments that there's kind of the Supreme Court justices are just using plain English, and the lawyers are the ones who are
Right.
they're going through these contortions to try
Right.
to explain away very common sense
Right.
points. So I think that might be revealing more of the actual the case itself, the sort of the straightforwardness of the case itself as opposed to them necessarily being good debaters or something. I don't think I heard any liberal justices in any of the links.
I listened to them. They were not compelling. They were not good. Just trust me. I'm being objective.
Okay,
There's
yeah,
conservative
I
justices
believe
who
you.
are not particularly good at debate either. Clarence Thomas is well known as a person who doesn't talk a lot and doesn't bring forth good arguments when he does speak. It doesn't seem like Kavanaugh said anything particularly amazing.
Interesting.
Um, but all the liberal justices were really underwhelming. The only really super impressive intellects that I could discern were Gorsuch and Alito. They just cut right through the BS, stated their arguments and their ideas in plain language, and didn't get rebuttals. They had full control of what was happening, their ideas, and what they were trying to express, and people didn't were really incapable of rebutting them. And the other thing is they're very polite about it. I guess you can be polite when you have all the power, right? Because you're on the Supreme Court. You don't have to be
It
rude.
seems Yeah, it does seem like a fairly friendly slash jovial environment.
It
You know,
does,
it kind of.
but also you can feel the stress on the part of the lawyers, especially since they were arguing, in my opinion, from such a weak position. They just seem like school kids that got caught. School kids that
It,
got caught, and now the people in authority are questioning you. That's the impression that I got.
the thing is, did you? I got the impression that the lawyers were not that well prepared in the sense that you're going to be asked
I think they were well prepared.
certain questions.
They cited some case law, you know. They studied up. But here's the thing.
But don't you think you could come up with
No.
something more compelling than what
No,
they
no,
came up
they
with?
came up with the most compelling stuff. You know, the whole diversity is its own good. That is the most compelling part to argue for affirmative action. Here's the thing, affirmative action is a very difficult position to defend. Because as soon as people start talking about, well, why should this person be favored over that person? They really start to poke holes in it. And it's a difficult position to defend. It's not very popular even nationwide. When people are asked in polls or at the ballot box whether affirmative action is a good thing, they generally say no because it cuts at this very core fundamental idea of American values of fairness that they don't think that people should be discriminated against based on their color. Like there's this if you spend all your time on Twitter and you spend all your time watching MSNBC, you've probably gotten used to this idea that anti-racism is the right way to go. And that's the normal way to think of things. Anti-racism, meaning in order to combat the racism of the past, we actually need, if you read Ibram Kendi X, this is the whole anti-racism spiel. We need to conduct racism against oppressors, against white people, against whoever's overrepresented. That's the only way to combat the racism of the past. Okay, if you're on Twitter and if you're, on the 1619 project, maybe I got the year wrong, but if you're one of those morons, all of that sounds perfectly normal. However, to the average American, it sounds like BS. The average American, regardless of color, regardless of class, thinks that we should be colorblind, thinks that individuals should be judged on their own merits. And even in cases
I
where
hope you're right. I hope you're right about that
no,
because
look at
yeah,
look at how California voted on affirmative action. Even
that's
California
true.
voted against it.
That's true.
If you look at nationwide polls, people are against affirmative action because their understanding of it is okay, we're still favoring one race. Are we not past that? Let's just judge people by their merits. Now, that doesn't mean that people are not for programs. Like I'm for programs where if you can identify groups that are underrepresented or have had uh, extra hurdles in front of them, let's spend money, let's create programs to make them more competitive. I think that's totally fair. I think that's not a problem at all. And I think most Americans would agree with that. But most Americans do not agree with okay, when it comes time to actual competing, when it comes time to actually choosing people to go to Harvard, when it comes time to actually choosing people to go to the MBA, they're against choosing for anything except merit. The best person should go. Now, if there are underrepresented groups that we want to bring up, then have programs to bring them up to be competitive. Sure. But if they're not competitive, then they're not competitive. And we should not have affirmative action programs that just paper over this issue and just bring them up anyway. No, that's not the right way. That's not the right way. And most people agree with that. Most people, their sense of fairness, their sense of a meritocracy makes them believe that affirmative action policies are bad. Look at every single poll. Look at every single poll in every single state. They don't think that this is a good policy. And yet somehow these policies persist because the elites that are most for these policies run these institutions. Harvard, University of California, University of every state. These are the people that run these organizations. So they're still all for it. The average American is not. And I think that what you're going to have very soon is Supreme Court is going to make some sort of ruling against affirmative action.
I think it's kind of ironic that in this case, it's like the users are trying to save the universities, right? It's like, well, in my opinion, in the long run, the universities are much better off just admitting students purely on the basis of merit. And with affirmative action, you get people like Joy Reid, right? And that to me is
Yeah,
it's just
Joy
gonna
Reid's a fucking moron.
yeah,
Yeah,
they're just shooting themselves in the foot in the long term. I mean, in the long term, people won't the reputation of Harvard will be so damaged by
right,
people like
right,
Joy Reid that there's just nobody that's even going to want to go to Harvard.
right.
But the irony is that it's actually the customers that are trying to save the institutions, and whereas the institutions are basically trying to self-destruct, but
Yeah,
they just don't know it. But
yeah.
yeah,
And I want to reiterate again that this is not sour grapes, okay? We went to good schools, okay? I went to pretty much the school I wanted to go to. You have close relatives that went to Harvard. I have close relatives that went to Harvard and MIT. There, it's not like we think that, oh man, Asians just have zero chance. Of course, no, we don't have zero chance. We have a shot at going to these places, and we're not crying. It's we're fine, okay? But it's just not. It's not. A, it's not fair. It's not. B, it's not a meritocracy, and C, it's not even good for society as a whole to humor this stupid system of anti-racist policies that just weaken us. And try to remember, the United States doesn't exist in a vacuum. We're not the entire world or Earth or universe. We compete against other countries. Try to remember that. It is to our benefit to promote the best and brightest and to foster those people and not to just humor this stupid system of virtue signaling. Okay? And if you listen to some of these arguments, they bring certain things up. One of the things I want to point out is they brought up a previous case where one of the justifications for affirmative action policies that was accepted by the court was that it would have a certain endpoint, right? They said, well, essentially the people who were for affirmative action policies said, well, we need it to redress previous wrongs. But we don't need it forever because at some point the wrongs will be redressed, right? So we can then continue on just treating people as individuals and by merit. At some point that will happen. That was
yeah,
like 50 years ago. I mean, that was like
that,
50 years ago. And then the question was posed to one of these Harvard lawyers, like, do you think we're close to that end point, buddy? And he says, oh yeah, we're really close. But you know what? I've never called BS more on a person lying to my face than at that moment. Because clearly that point will never be reached for him or for Harvard. It will continue in perpetuity.
yeah.
Nobody laid out
It,
a timeline and laid out metrics as far as, oh, well, here's when we won't need affirmative action policies anymore. Nobody has laid those out because they wanted them to continue forever. Okay? Okay? And then there was also another part where the Harvard guy, the Harvard lawyer, made a defense. He was being questioned by Chief Justice Roberts. And he said, and this is actually pretty good on his part. I have to admit that it's like kind of a smart response. He said, well, imagine you have a symphony and you have just a ton of good oboe players, but we only need so many oboe players that year. So we're going to let in only the best oboe players, but we're going to, make concessions for the best drummers or the violinists, et cetera, right? Trying to basically what he's saying is Asians are oboe players, right? And we only need so many of you guys. So it doesn't matter that you have like 100 really awesome oboe players. Our symphony only needs X number of oboe players. First of all, a university is not a symphony. It's not delineated like that. That's BS, right? But Chief Justice Roberts had the perfect response. He basically said, we did not fight a civil war to ensure that oboe players would not be discriminated against.
right,
We
right.
did fight a civil war in order to ensure that people would not be discriminated against based on their race. So you need a stronger argument than this oboe shit.
Yeah, I don't think that was that grave an argument, just because the analogy seems so
Well, I mean, it
tenuous.
was a decent argument just based on, well, if you accept the logic of the premise, right? Then it does make sense.
Sure,
But the
but yeah,
the premise doesn't fit the situation.
right.
The premise doesn't fit the
There aren't
situation.
there aren't unique functions with limited number of positions like that.
No, because students are more fungible. I mean, it's like you can't say like, well, we only need X amount of engineers to come out of Harvard. Therefore, we're only going to let in X amount of Asians. What? Asians can be English majors. Asians can be drama majors. Asians can be uh, anything, political science majors. Asian, just let in the most qualified students, right?
Okay, I got a question for you. So, what if this is never going to happen? It's just a hypothetical. What if it was true that the customers actually genuinely cared about diversity? So you had students who, let's say really, really smart students, they want to go to a school that's diverse. And as a result, they're comparing these different schools. They look at Harvard and they're like, oh man,
No,
Harvard's not diverse enough. So I'm not
nope.
gonna go to Harvard. I want to go to some other school, right? So then Harvard starts losing applicants because of this.
Still doesn't matter.
Is there anything they can do
Legally, no.
to
Legally, no. What if I was a white person and said, I don't want to go to a restaurant that has black people in it? And the restaurant stopped admitting black people. And their explanation was, well, we have X amount of customers who just don't want to sit in a restaurant with black people. Therefore, we're
right?
justified to do this, to stop admitting black people. Would the Supreme Court agree with that? No, no.
It's interesting
You
though,
cannot
because I
you
mean,
cannot discriminate against black people just because most of your customers don't want to sit with them. You cannot discriminate against Asian people just because it serves what your customers want. It doesn't even matter what your customers want. You cannot discriminate against people based on race. That is the law.
that yeah, that's interesting. So basically, so then some universities would just fail because they weren't diverse enough.
Then they fail.
Yeah,
Then they fail. That's too bad. That's fine. According to the law, then they can fail. But we know that that wouldn't really happen.
right.
There's
It
there's
wouldn't
plenty of
happen.
there's plenty of universities in the South, the deep South, where we want to assume most of the racists live, right? Do they have racist admission policies? No. Have they all failed? No. Here's the other thing that I found really entertaining about these Supreme Court exchanges. There have been so many times, and this is where the justices really stick it to them. They ask them, "Well, are you discriminating against them?" And then many of the lawyers will say, "Yeah, kind of, but it doesn't make a statistical difference. Like there aren't less Asians in Harvard because of these things we do. Really honest, there aren't." And then the Supreme Court justices will say, "Well, if it makes no statistical difference, why are you still doing it?" And crickets. Literally, there's no answer to that.
I
Why are you
actually
still
here.
doing? Why are you still doing
I,
it if it makes no difference?
yeah, exactly. But I wrote down what the lawyer's response to that question was,
What
right?
was it?
So the lawyer first said something like, "Oh, there's no effect with respect to the outcomes," and then I think it was probably Alito said, "Oh, it makes no difference," and then the guy replied, "No statistical difference." So then Alito asked him, "Oh, so why do you do it?" And then the guy actually replied, and I'm just gonna quote. This is just verbatim exactly what he said. The fact that Asian Americans got on average, a marginally lower personal rating score is no more evidence of discrimination against them than the fact that they got a marginally higher rating than any data can show on academics and extracurriculars. It doesn't mean that they're either smarter or people think they're smarter. So it's basically a non-answer.
No, but here's the problem. Here's the problem. Your score against them on their personality thing is subjective based on what you did. Their academic score that's marginally higher, as you say, is based on what they earned. That's the difference. You have things put in place to determine which students are the best, and they earned better scores on those metrics. And then
I,
you
I
gave
I
them
actually,
and you gave them lower scores on a subjective metric.
I
Yeah,
also
it does
think that
matter because it cancels it out.
I think that a lot of times when they're answering these questions, they're playing it a bit loose with the definition of discrimination, right? It's almost like they're saying that, oh no, it's not discrimination unless you can, find this like example where somebody looked at an application and said,
Yeah,
"Oh, this
right,
one's Asian, and I'm going to toss it because it's Asian."
right.
It's like
Which there's
just
no such
because
thing.
yeah, just because they can't find that, therefore there's no discrimination. It feels like that's what they've kind of fallen back on. You know what else is funny? At one point, it might have been the same lawyer said that descriptive statistics are not evidence of discrimination, and I think that is like that's
Oh,
hilarious
okay.
because it's like, oh, is that so? Really?
How so? I
Um,
mean,
just about,
they're the most discriminatory because you can just say whatever you want.
but that's like the descriptive statistics are at the basis of all their arguments for why, black people are getting discriminated.
Yes.
It's like, and now suddenly, it's suddenly not evidence of discrimination. It
There's
just
no
it blows my
there's
mind.
no logical way out of this. So you can just tell that the lawyers are they're not stupid. They know when they've been
But
handed a really
yeah,
bad hand and they're just
yeah,
trying
but
to argue their way out of it.
that's kind of why I thought that these lawyers are not as prepared as they could have been. Just because, like, what this guy just the reply that this guy had to, the why did you do it? It wasn't really a non sequitur. Like he's basically not even answering the question. He's
Yes,
basically just saying, "Oh,
they just tap dance around it because there's no good answer. Sometimes there is no good answer. Sometimes there is no good answer. And as a lawyer, you can't just say, well, you stumped me. That's not an option. Like Harvard didn't pay you X amount of money to just say, well, you got me. You have to say something. So you just sort of tap dance around it.
What about the argument? It's funny. Their arguments are so. I just think they're all so bad. Another argument that that they basically they care about viewpoint diversity, but they're saying that in order to
Oh
get
yeah.
viewpoint
They're
diversity,
like viewpoint
they
diversity, like, but every single time they said that, I just had to choke or chuckle or whatever it is. Because we all know that there's no viewpoint diversity coming out of these Ivy League schools.
okay, that's not where I was going. I mean, I was just saying they make the assumption that different races having a mixture of races will automatically lead to viewpoint diversity, which is
Well, that's
like
not
blatant
true either. Yeah, yeah.
stereotyping.
That's
It's
also not
blatant
true.
stereotyping,
Right.
right? But that's the argument that they're making.
Oh, and also they came there was an amicus brief. Is that what it's called? Amicus brief? It's just like somebody who's not involved in the case, but they want to chime in with their BS, right? Of a bunch of Asians who said, "Oh, we were super happy that it was diverse." Like we learned a lot about all these different races when we were at Harvard, so we were super happy. And I'm like, yeah, you can say that because you fucking went to Harvard, you fucks. What about
What
the
about
kids that really wanted to go to Harvard and didn't get in? How about those people?
okay?
Where are their voices in this opinion or this amicus brief? The people who were shut out of Harvard, they don't have an opinion about how awesome the diversity was now, do they? You do because you actually went there. Now, I'm not, again, this is
Yeah,
not sour grapes. I didn't want
selection
to go to
bias.
Harvard. Yeah, I didn't want
But
to go to Harvard.
yeah, that's
We
clear
we both
selection
know
bias.
people who got in. It's not like we were robbed of it or our families were robbed of it. Both of our families had people go to Harvard, okay? But this amicus brief from people who said, "Oh yeah, it was awesome that we had so much diversity." Easy to say once you got in, now isn't it? Easy to say after you get in. That's all I'll say about that.
What do you think about the argument? And I don't buy this argument, but I'm just saying, asking what do you think about it? That if you have a more, if you're exposed to a more diverse environment in terms of mixture of races, that you're less likely to be racist coming out of that environment. Do you think that's true?
No, I'm not sure. I won't say yes or no.
Okay.
I'm not totally sure. I will say that it's totally BS to say that people are more effective if they had a diverse environment. I don't think they're
Racially,
more effective.
racially
Racially
diverse.
diverse,
Yeah.
right? I don't think that's not true at all, and that's not me trying to say that racial homogeneity is better. I'm just saying the opposite is not superior either. Okay, we lost the war against North Vietnamese.
Yeah.
Germany was winning a war that they shouldn't have even been winning. Two world wars, they were racially homogenous. The people, there was that famous picture with like Einstein and Oppenheimer and all the people who've pioneered all the great 20th century scientific achievements, like changing physics and creating an atomic bomb and all that.
Yeah.
You know that famous picture, right? That famous picture, like a no. Where did they take it? Like a Nobel Prize? So I don't know where it was, a
mm,
conference or something, where Heisenberg, Einstein, Oppenheimer were there. I don't know. I'm
I
just
see.
throwing names out there.
I see.
Anyway, the point is, all those people were Jewish. It didn't really stop them from catapulting human understanding and science. Now, did it?
Right.
Do you think that they would have they would have created time travel if there were a few more black people and Asian people in that picture? Come
Yeah. I
on,
mean, yeah.
is that what would have happened? Or maybe it had zero impact one way or the other. It's just a group of
China,
super smart people.
if it mattered so much, China would be really trying hard to, hire white people and black people
Yeah, you think? I just don't think.
to be
Yeah,
more diverse.
I just
Yeah.
don't think it matters one way or the other. If you
You know,
have a
okay.
bunch of smart
So,
people, then they'll do cool stuff.
so my that hypothetical argument was prompted by recent observation of mine, where basically I asked a family member who recently moved here from Taiwan about sort of how he's a freshman in a local high school, which is much more diverse than a school would be in Taiwan. And I just asked him what how are you liking it? And he actually, he says he really likes it. He's getting along with everybody. And one of the first things he talked about was that he actually appreciated the diversity, the racial diversity. I mean, he didn't.
Okay.
That's my paraphrase a bit, but I think there's a pretty decent mix, right? Although I think there's still not that many blacks, but there are a significant number of Latinos and
Okay.
and
So
whites, which he wouldn't have
he
been exposed
likes
to.
it, but does that produce anything functional? Just liking it doesn't mean that it produced something better.
Right. Yeah, I just thought it was an interesting data point, because
Hmm.
that's somebody who was kind of exposed to or just been in an environment of homogeneity their entire life, actually kind of maybe it's just like the grass is always greener on the other side sort of thing.
Hmm.
Did you want to talk at all about Tucker's observation that Justice Sotomayor
Yeah.
is a moron?
No, she's a moron. You have to understand that a lot of these people are appointed not because they're leading lights in the legal field. They are appointed because they are the right people and they represent the right things.
Right, okay, so Tucker highlighted this quote from her, which is appalling, where she's confusing de facto and de jure.
Hmm.
Do you remember that? I don't know.
No, I don't, but it happens.
She's
But in
using the
fairness,
word
but in fairness, like Clarence Thomas is not that smart either.
okay.
Yeah, I mean the conservatives have appointed people that are not that
Okay, but
smart.
he but he is also black though.
Well, yeah, that's
So
why he was appointed.
yeah, exactly. It's consistent with
Yeah,
affirmative action
I guess. Yeah.
lowering the bar, I guess.
Well, like I said, the only people who impress me are Alito and Gorsuch.
Uh-huh.
Like, I would not want to get into an argument with either one of those guys about anything,
Mhm.
even about like what to eat tonight for dinner. You
But
probably
anyways,
lose that argument.
this quote from Sotomayor is just a total. I mean, it's a huge eye opener for me because I didn't know exactly how low the bar was. And I mean, if you look at this quote, she's basically confusing A with
Yeah.
not A, right? And it's
Right.
like
Right. Right.
this is so yeah, it's just hard to imagine actually. I bet if I showed
I'm
this
sorry to
to,
burst that bubble for you, but that's what it is.
I mean, yeah, I bet if I showed this to my relatives or other friends, they would be
They'll say,
shocked.
"Wow, this person's smart enough to be on the Supreme Court." Yes, yes. It's not about how smart you are. But the Supreme Court is a political body at this point. And
Yeah,
it
that's
may
what.
have
Yeah,
always been. It may have always been. I don't. You know, I'm not a historian.
Hmm.
There's always smart people on it, but there will be dumb
Yeah.
people on it that were appointed for politics too. That's true.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, which is like, because it just seemed like they were all asking questions along party lines, sort of. But
It's basically a political body at this point.
yeah, that's
But that's sort of
kind of
good
too
for
bad.
conservatives because they own the court 6-3. However, they have independence. So if somebody just wants to do whatever they want to do based on their own conscience or concept of what's correct correct law, they can do it. Nobody can stop them.
Do you remember who the guy was that was asking? Basically, he was asking one of the lawyers, like, under what circumstances can you check one of these, racial boxes?
Alito.
It was Alito, yeah. And
Hmm.
then basically, the guy was sort of like, well, the lawyer was saying, yeah, basically it's up to you to, it's self-reported and it's
Yeah,
sort
and
of
he said, "Well, can
based on
my
what
grandfather,
exactly,
can my
yeah,
great grandfather, can my great 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 grandfather be?"
yeah,
And
Indian
then
or
and the
something.
lawyer just had to admit, "I know where you're going with this." Like, good, you know where I'm going? Stupid. That's what I'm trying to say.
He was like, "Oh yeah, what if there was just lore in our family that we
Right.
had some
What if
American
you had
Indian
what if you had what if
like
you had Elizabeth Warren levels of Brown in your family? Right? What if it
uh,
was 1/1000th? Can that still qualify? It's stupid at this point, right? It's stupid. Yeah, that it just highlights the absurdity of it. So he was right to ask that question. Elizabeth Warren says that she has 1/1000th Native American. Does that mean that she is less privileged than a poor white person who grew up in a poor area or whatever? Hell no, it doesn't mean that, right? But according to this stupid anti-racist stupid logic, it does mean that. And yeah, that really pokes hole in this whole idea that yeah, race is the determining factor. Race is such an important factor. It really pokes holes in that.
Oh, what do you think about the argument that college admissions is not a meritocracy because of legacy admissions?
I think it's a fair argument, but here's what I would say to that. Then let's get rid of legacy admissions. That's fine. I don't care.
Hmm.
People always use that as some sort of boogeyman, like, oh, but what about You know how small a percentage legacy admissions are? Legacy, think about it. It's you have to come from a family that can donate millions of dollars to the university. How many
Right,
people is that?
right.
It's probably less people than the squash team. So the squash
Yeah,
team
yeah.
gets as many the squash team gets as many dispensations as
But there,
legacy.
it's that's one category, and yeah, that's probably really small. But what about just alumni relations? I think that also usually matters. Usually helps, I think.
Do you think just because you
Yeah,
went
I
to
think so.
Harvard, it really matters, like to Harvard's admissions? Just because
I
you went, you didn't even give money, but you went.
Yeah, I think that actually, I think they take into account. I don't know for a fact, but
Oh, I don't
I,
know. I
yeah.
don't think they do. I would disagree with you on that.
Hmm.
I don't think that you put in your application that, hey, my dad went to Harvard. Like, yeah, but has he given
You
us a
don't have to
million
put
dollars?
that in your application. I mean, they would know.
They would know, but I just don't feel that if he hasn't given money, I don't think they
Hmm.
care.
It could even be there's giving money could even be a checkbox, right? Where it's like, oh,
But why would they
like,
care if you don't give money?
but I'm saying like even if you gave like I don't know, $10, maybe that
Why
would
would they
check some
care if you
box.
gave $10? I
What
would
I'm saying
have
is
to think, no, I don't
maybe it's
know.
just
I
a
mean,
checkbox. Obviously, at some point,
I don't think, I don't
if you
think
got
that,
if you got a building named after you, that's obviously that's a different category.
hey,
But
if you paid for a building at Harvard, I think your kid deserves to go to Harvard. Right? It's a business at the end of the day, and your kid equals a building. It's kind of worth it, right? Let's be realistic. But if you just went to Harvard, who cares? So what? How much money did you give? I just don't believe that legacy works that way. Hey, maybe it does. Someone can correct us if we're wrong. I just like so if a person just went to Harvard, their kid automatically gets in or has a huge advantage, even if you
no,
gave
no, no,
zero
no.
dollars.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. I am saying that they can take it into consideration.
Maybe they shouldn't. I would say they shouldn't. I don't think they should. I think your kid should earn their own place, just like everybody else should own their own place. However, I think it's a red herring when people say that, oh, well, what about legacy? And I think this is a small percentage of the population that we're talking about, a very small percentage. And the people who are let in on legacy, I think that, yeah, their parents really contributed a lot to the university. It is a business at the end of the day, I guess. So you can let in a couple of these rich kids because, buildings were named after their parents. So I don't know. I think it's a red herring. I don't think legacy is a big problem, but I'm willing to be wrong on that. It's probably no bigger than student athletes. And people get in playing dumb sports, right? They get scholarships just playing a sport nobody cares about. Anyway, the point is, we're going to be talking about this again soon because the Supreme Court is very clearly going to strike down some segment of affirmative action policies. How narrow or broad it is the only question at this point. They have a 6-3 majority. If Roberts is on their side, they definitely have a 6-3 majority. If he's not, then they have a 5-4 majority, which is still enough.